Obviously, the child sexual abuse issue is a significant national issue, national problem, with a variety of dimensions: moral, legal, sociological, psychological. It's also a very complex issue. And by the time the Royal Commission was announced, I think that there had been an opinion formed publicly that the Catholic Church was the main culprit in this whole issue. I don't think the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard did herself any favours by announcing the Royal Commission and stating that she'd consulted Cardinal Pell as the only churchman in the country that she'd consulted before making the announcement public. That again focused attention on the Catholic Church. And in the next 2 months before the commissioners were appointed and the terms of reference were released, most of the public debate was again focused on the Catholic Church. So in order to be true to the complexity of the problem, one of the main motivations in writing the book was to introduce a sense of perspective and to point out that there are a number of misconstructions about the Catholic Church and its culpability, and what had been done inside the church, what hadn't been done inside the church.
We are trying to introduce a different kind of narrative here, and to get a conversation going, I suppose, about what the issues are, and in particular the breadth of the issue. I mean, if Chris mentioned Cardinal Pell, I mean, there are other people in the society who should have been consulted, other bishops in the Catholic Church who should have been consulted when the Royal Commission was set up, and I'm talking basically about church people, not just social welfare people, and victims, of course. But there is a possibility for the whole debate to get derailed and victims to be forgotten again when issues such as the seal of confession or celibacy or canon law is mentioned. This is, or say, other agendas altogether which can come through in this debate, be attached to the debate, and then what happens to the concerns for the victims, and what happens to locating the church in a particular kind of society where child abuse is gradually being revealed as a major social problem, not just a Catholic or a church problem.
Is it easy to be even-handed in reporting on this issue?
Well, it's never easy to be even-handed, and it's even harder to appear to be even-handed. When, as Damian mentioned, we basically challenge the prevailing narrative on this issue as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. And when you challenge a prevailing narrative, then you're likely to get your head kicked in by all sorts of people. So the perception of even-handedness is a greater problem than the attempt to be even-handed, but to be even-handed, of course, it raises a difficulty. You have to be selective in what you're looking at, and so forth. We're not really about apportioning blame or releasing people of responsibility or whatever. What we're trying to do is to show that there was progress made on this issue in the Catholic Church, not by everybody, but if you look at the Church as a whole, there was progress made, at least up until the late 1990s. Things tended to get stopped in their tracks in the late 1990s for various reasons that we explore in the book, and then they're picked up again after that. Some people did more than others, some people did less than others, but it's not a blame game that we're involved in.
You mentioned there 1990s, and I think a strength of your book is just the historical perspective and how you painstakingly lay out and examine what has happened over the years. But to me, as an observer, that this has been going on for so long, and it seems like the Church just has not grasped the nettle. Why has it taken so long?
Well, Peter, I think that we have to understand about the problem of child abuse that it was constructed gradually from the early 60s on. First of all, child abuse was identified with baby battering, and then incest, and then sexual abuse gradually came in. And am I saying here, look, it's all a matter of hindsight and we can see things better now? No, I'm saying that the problem itself came to be understood differently over a period of about 30 or 40 years. And what do I mean by that? Well, it wasn't that abuse was ever condoned, but it was thought that in the 60s and 70s it was a minor thing as far as children being treated by adults in inappropriate ways sexually, in the sense that if you didn't make a big fuss of it, they'd get over it. This was a time of liberalism, which subsequently has been shown to be very, very misconceived, very ill-founded. And so the notion of abuse in terms of the effects on children throughout their lives, their adult lives, has gradually been understood. So when that problem was being constructed, the church wasn't, as it were, facing the problem we are today. When it became obvious that child abuse was widespread in Catholic religious orders and that a few perpetrators, when I say relatively few compared with the number of clergy, had caused enormous damage to children, the bishops then started to act, and the religious congregations as well. But they weren't addressing the problem that we see today in those earlier years of reaction.
Right.
So that's why the history is important. And as Chris was saying before too, it's not just a history of passivity and cover-up. I mean, the stories about cover-up are genuine. Roger Marnie in Los Angeles has been just taken off all kinds of duties. Now, his excuse for what appears to be a clear cover-up in that archdiocese in America was that he was naive. The extraordinary thing is there might be some truth in that, but nevertheless, it was an appalling kind of thing to do. In Australia, the stories differ from diocese to diocese. There seems to be something like moral imbecility in some dioceses where the bishops, well, I don't know that they were covering up so much as running for cover. They were refusing to take responsibility for things which were clearly theirs to deal with. But that's not the story. It's not a uniform story. It's very, very complex, and you have to look at it almost on a case-by-case basis.
Well, it says, the authors recognise that the Royal Commission has caused the church institution to face reality and consider its many poor practices and mistakes. But can you talk a bit about what will be the effect and significance of the Royal Commission that's going on now?
Well, just before we do, I think there's a slight inaccuracy in that. The Catholic Church was actually confronting this issue very slowly, in a piecemeal fashion for a long time, but by the mid-1990s it was confronting this problem in a serious manner, and it was confronting this problem in a manner which was ahead of the game of other churches in this country. So to say that the Royal Commission focuses the Church's attention is true in the sense that it kind of encourages a much more thorough examination of its record and consideration of its procedures and so forth, but it's not correct to say that the Catholic Church is focused on this issue only as a consequence of the Royal Commission being called. Again, what happened in the late 1990s was that the local church in Australia, as in the United States, was frustrated in its efforts to deal with this problem as it saw fit, largely by the bureaucracy in Rome. And so there's a kind of a perception that nothing happened for a while, which to a certain extent is true. But by about 2004, 2005, there were attempts to kind of overcome that frustration or that blockage of initiatives, and the bishops were kind of back on track. Now, they're much more on track now with the attention that the Royal Commission has generated and the public debate around the Royal Commission. But it's important to recognise that they were working on this problem over the last 20 years or so.
I think that's true. I mean, it clearly is true. However, the Royal Commission will do other things as well. It'll start to make the Church think more and more in terms of its administrative procedures, being obsessed with the personal and the pastoral. Well, it's good, it's a mission of the Church, but without a decent kind of accountability system and a decent professional attitude towards pastoral and personal matters, it's not going to really be a successful church. So just things like document retention and making sure that you've got adequate records, preparing bishops properly for the tasks they'll have in running a diocese, and then the handover process from one bishop to another. These are the things that have come out, not just in the Royal Commission, but in the Canino Inquiry. I suppose the big thing for me, big revelation for me in all the inquiries so far has been that the Church has not communicated with itself. That is, bishops have not communicated with bishops. Rome hasn't been able to communicate with bishops. Quite frankly, I think one aspect of the statement of conclusions, which the Australian bishops were required to sign up to, was the Vatican shouting, "Pay attention to us. You're not doing anything we say." I mean, for a bishop to file an important document about reporting child abuse in a filing cabinet in case it was needed, rather than reading it and absorbing it, is totally unacceptable. And those things have come out in the various inquiries into child abuse in the church, and they'll need to be fixed up. What I'm a bit concerned about, though, is attempts by lawyers to turn the church into some sort of corporation or bureaucracy. I don't think that more rules protect children. Clearly, if you want to make people conform, you have to work with internal motivation. And more rules don't do that. More rules don't even produce better accountability. And in fact, what they do is reduce responsibility. People say, look, it's not my responsibility. There's a rule to take care of this. Someone can report it if the rule's infringed.